Hey guys, how's it going? I am here to do the Apple book tag. I was tagged in this by Steve Donahue, so thanks for tagging me, Steve. He actually tagged me in two tags in 2 days. I guess I get a taste of what it's like to be Curtis Books and Films. But I need to tag Steve back pretty soon, at some point. But so this is just a series of prompts with names of apples and questions about that relate to questions about books. So yeah, and a lot of these, I have never been good with apple varieties, which is kind of shameful because I'm from upstate New York, and if you've ever been to upstate New York, if you trip, it's likely that you tripped on an apple, and it's also likely that you landed in an apple orchard or in a dairy farm. But apple orchards come in a close second to dairy farms in upstate New York. But it was an apple orchard like 2-minute drive and a 10-minute walk from the house I grew up in. And I have a lot of fond memories of going there and picking apples and eating at the cafe there. And I was also in a production of Twelfth Night that took place there. I had no lines. I was like a guard or something, and I just kind of took part in a choreographed sword fighting sequence, got my butt kicked, and walked off the stage. But yeah, it was a good time though. I met some nice people in that production. But yeah. Anyway, without further ado, I will get to the tag. Just a quick note, though, before I start, I do promise I recorded this on the same day as my Henry V video. I just happened to have taken a shower and changed my shirt, that's all. So I promise it's the same day. But yeah. Anyway, back to the tag. So the first prompt is Granny Smith, an overbearingly sweet work or character. And I picked Sylvie from Marilynne Robinson's Housekeeping. So this novel is about two sisters whose mother commits suicide, and they end up getting taken care of by their eccentric aunt, who is Sylvie. And she, at the same time, she seems very innocent in a way. She's kind of kooky. She does weird things like look into other people's houses at what they're watching on the TV. She doesn't actually do a very good job of taking care of the two sisters. But I find her hard to resist just because of her weirdness, because I'm also a bit kooky. I don't know if that comes through on this channel at all, but if you ever meet me in real life, and get to know me well enough, you will find that I'm pretty kooky. At least I'm told that. Yeah, I couldn't help but falling in love with her. So yeah, that's my answer for the first one. Second is Fuji, a work about a mountain. For me, the first thing that came to my mind was The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway, which is a short story, but it's basically about a man who's on Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa and is dying, and it's just kind of about his dying regrets. And he's a writer, or at least he claims to be a writer, although he doesn't actually write that much, because a lot of what constitutes the short story is him thinking through all the things he'd meant to write throughout his life, but just never buckled down and actually wrote. I found that story interesting because I used to have ambitions to be a writer, but sort of gave up on it. So yeah, that is my pick for that one. Next is Red Delicious, a book that would be perfect if it was only judged by its cover. And for this, I have this cover by Ted Naismith of The Silmarillion. The Silmarillion is also perfect based on its contents, but I love this picture. It's actually a very poignant moment in the Silmarillion, if you know the story. And by the time I bought this edition, I had read the book like 3 times, so I did know what it was. And I love the Elvish, the runes down here and up here. Ted Naismith actually does a lot of illustrations. He does many illustrations throughout this edition, but there's also eagles on the back carrying Baron and Luthien. So yeah, I think this is a great cover. I really like this. Next is Golden Yellow, a book with a yellow cover. I picked Tis by Frank McCourt. It was one of only, I think, 3 books that I have that have yellow covers. So this is Frank McCourt's memoir. It's a sequel to his more famous first memoir, Angela's Ashes, which was about his life growing up desperately poor in Ireland, and this memoir picks up when he's 19 and is moving to New York City. And it's just basically his misadventures through his early life, up until he gets married and has a daughter and gets divorced. So I guess it makes it into his 30s. But the parts I loved were the parts in his 20s, when he was young and kind of didn't know what to do with his life, wasn't sure whether he was doing the right thing with his life. He just kind of drifts from job to job for a while. He talks about his passion for reading. He tells a hilarious story about trying to go see a production of Hamlet, and he wants to bring in a piece of cake that he bought with him into the production to eat while he watches, but he's told that he can't, and so he goes to the bathroom to eat it while sitting on the toilet, and it's just hilarious. He ends up like dropping the piece of cake, and another guy walks into the bathroom and starts judging him for eating in the bathroom, and he just has a way of turning mundane stories like that into really great reading. So yeah. Next is Mackintosh, a writer that has influenced or would influence your writing. And for this, I picked a book that I don't have with me. It's a nonfiction book. It's Blues People by Amiri Baraka. So Amiri Baraka is well known as a poet, but he also wrote this nonfiction book about the history of blues music. And I actually read this for a class called Professional Writing. So I was already in that context of learning how to write professionally, which basically just means writing nonfiction, which is primarily what I write, because what I write is essays and abstracts for posters and things like that. And I think it was my first real experience noticing that nonfiction writing could also be just as eloquent and beautiful as writing of fiction. Or that is, it was a craft. It was sort of an art form. That got me really excited about writing nonfiction in articles and other things that I will be writing in my career. So, yeah, and also just he has a very nice sort of, he's one of those writers who really doesn't use big words, and that had a big influence on me because in academia you find a lot of people writing in, jargon, and, it's so hard to follow, but I try really hard to write as simply as possible about the complex ideas that I do have to write about. So, yeah. Next is Honeycrisp, a book you have read that is in great demand, and my first thought when I read this question was, well, not to sound like a grumpy old man, but, well, I read a lot of classics and nonfiction, and those don't tend to be in high demand. But one classic that I have read that is in very high demand everywhere, all the time, is the Bible. This is actually the edition that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints publishes, better known as the Mormons. And the reason I like it is because it actually has little summaries before each chapter. I don't know if you can see that, but there is a summary kind of in italics under the chapter, and yeah, I have read the Bible. I want to reread it at some point. I started to reread it, that's where I marked my page. I read the book of Genesis. I've read the book of Genesis like 6 times, because I tried several times to read this, and, every time I tried to read it, I would start at the book of Genesis and then lose interest at, like, the end of Exodus or something. And so I know the book of Genesis far too well, and the rest of it I don't know very well. So, yeah. So yeah, the Bible. Next is, let's see, Baldwin, a writer you feel needs recognition due to stunted acclaim, whether it was due to something that happened to them or to a premature death. And I'm gonna say Václav Havel. Václav Havel is very well known as the first president of the Czech Republic, but he also was a very well-known, very important playwright. And this is his collection, The Garden Party and Other Plays. And they're kind of kooky. They're kind of weird and experimental, very... they reminded me a bit of Beckett, Samuel Beckett, even though I've only read one play by Samuel Beckett. But Havel says himself in this book, which is sort of an interview that was a published interview with him, that he was very influenced by the theater of the absurd, which was kind of where Beckett was, and Albert Camus too. So yeah, my favorite of these plays is actually The Memorandum, which is a play where this company tries to improve communication between employees by developing this fake language that is supposed to convey the exact meaning of what the message is, along with all the context. So there's like 20 different ways just to say, I need so-and-so, I need Bob, because, like, there's, I need him for this, or I need him for X, or I need him for Y, and so there would be different ways to say each of those, and it's so complicated that no one can understand it, and by the middle of the play, near the end of the play, no one knows what's going on. No one can learn this language, and so it just kind of explores the stupidity of excessive bureaucracy, sort of, and I liked it. And then also there's this interview he did where you really see some of his insights into politics and other things. And then here's The Power of the Powerless, which is an essay he wrote. There are other essays by other Czech thinkers in here, but this is his book, The Power of the Powerless, and it's about kind of totalitarian regimes and the individual's relation to them. I know, even though I haven't read it yet. I think I'm going to read this for Nonfiction November, though, so I will hopefully be reporting back on it. Next is Empire, a work about or set in New York, and I picked The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which is about 13-year-old Theo Decker, who's being taken care of by his mother. His father has left. His father is kind of an asshole, alcoholic, drug addict, all the bad things. And at the beginning of the novel, his mother is killed in a terrorist accident in an art museum, and Theo, kind of on a whim, steals the famous painting, The Goldfinch, which is that. And it just kind of follows him through the years until he's about 27. After his mother's death, he drifts between an adoptive family. He lives with his father for a while, and then returns to New York. He gets involved in the underground art business. He starts selling art pieces that are fake that his friend makes. And it's kind of a thriller, I guess. I liked it. I enjoyed it, and I thought it was pretty moving at parts. But yeah. So next is Gala, a work that fits under many genres. And this I had to go with The Way to Rainy Mountain by N. Scott Momaday, which whenever I talk about this book, I don't know what to call it, because it's kind of a collection of the mythology of the Kiowa Nation, but it's also kind of a memoir by Momaday, and it also has sections that are more traditional nonfiction in it, where he talks about historical events of the Kiowa and the culture of the Kiowa, and there's also a preface and an afterword that are very kind of personal essays, and then there's also even a poem at the very end. So there you see it. So I don't really ever know what to say about it, because I can't just come up and say it's a collection of myths about the Kiowa, because it's not just that. It's also sort of a memoir. It's also sort of just a meditation on the Kiowa peoples, and through that, I think implicitly it's an meditation on the condition of Native Americans and what they've gone through. So yeah, this is a very interesting book. I highly recommend it. Next is Ambrosia, a long work that was easy to follow. And for me, I'm going with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So this is 500 plus pages. Not the longest book ever, but because it follows only a few characters, I, found it very easy to go along with. And it also, honestly, it's sort of like a crime thriller. I think it's has its own kind of suspense. It's maybe sort of more psychological suspense within the main character's own head, more than, like, traditional suspense where we're, like, worried that someone's gonna die or something. But yeah, this is easy to follow. I honestly would recommend this as a good place to start with Dostoevsky, just because it's pretty easy to go along with. So yeah. Next is Jazz, a work written in or after 2010 that demonstrates freshness and originality. So like I said, I don't read very many new releases ever, but the book I ended up going with, because it is it was published after 2010, and it is fresh and original in a certain sense. The new Trail of Tears by Naomi Schaefer Riley. So this explores, this looks at the current condition of Native Americans in the United States, which is pretty horrendous, and also looks at how the United States government's policies continue to kind of screw over Native Americans. And it's pretty disgusting what goes on, and it's pretty harrowing, her descriptions of reservations and what's going on them in terms of sexual abuse and the low quality of the schools there, and other things. So yeah, definitely original in the sense that it talks about a subject that I don't really see anyone else talking about. So except for when the Keystone XL, when the pipeline in South Dakota was in the news, which has already disappeared from consciousness anyway. So yeah. Next is Mutsu. Never heard of that kind of apple. A big book that you indulged. So this book, I don't have a book. I couldn't think of a book that I've already read that I indulged, but I have a book that I feel sort of like I'm currently indulging the author, and it's Shakespeare and the Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom. This is kind of a behemoth, but it, Harold Bloom goes through Shakespeare play by play, gives commentaries, and I have heard more mixed things about Harold Bloom since he's come up on BookTube. And so it's given me a more skeptical view of him, and I think that's good. And I do find that a lot of the time he makes these claims about a play and won't really substantiate it with much evidence, even if it's interesting. And also, sometimes it's hard to tell what he's actually trying to say in this book, to be honest. But yeah, I kind of feel like I'm reading it because I started it. I do enjoy reading it. I am still enjoying parts of it and finding some things interesting. So it's not like entirely like I'm just finishing it because I started it. But yeah, I kind of at this point am skeptical of Harold Bloom. Yeah. And next is what is your favorite apple? And for me, that's just, I know this is like so boring, but basically any apple that is fresh and crunchy and that is not one of the sour kind of apples. Which again, I don't know the name of because I don't know the names of apples for apple varieties. Yeah, so, and then the last prompt is Apple Tree. Who do you tag? And I'm going to tag Brian's Book Bastion. I haven't heard a tag from you in a while. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Bye.